The Oscars. 3 parts cringe, 3 parts boredom, 2 parts fashion, and 1 part actual talk about movies. It doesn't matter. Nobody watches this stuff anyway. Right? Hey everyone, I'm V for Verbatim, and I can't seem to escape my own cynicism. Today I'm going to be keeping a certain someone's name out of my effing mouth, and I will instead be doing quick reviews for 3 movies: Wes Anderson's The French Dispatch, Adam McKay's Don't Look Up, and Lin-Manuel Miranda's Tick, Tick, Boom. 2 are Oscar movies, and one is one I thought was up for an Oscar, but actually wasn't. This video will be light on spoilers, light on summary, and straight to the point. This is intervention for myself. No more 40-minute videos about movies. Is the movie good or not? Although I may talk a little bit about the Oscars and throw my own thoughts into the ring at the end of the video, possibly regarding a certain physical exchange between 2 parties, but we'll have to see, won't we? Anyway, onto the reviews, and for those who want to hear specific reviews, here's the timestamps for each one. Hopefully you enjoy. The French Dispatch is a Wes Anderson film about an American newspaper in France. It's an anthology piece with 3 main stories, ranging from an inmate painting with prison food and cigarettes, to college student activism led by new Hollywood darling Timothée Chalamet. Like seriously, he is in so many Oscar-nominated movies this year. Don't Look Up, he was probably hanging by a peach tree somewhere in the background of Power of the Dog. But anyway, the editor of the newspaper, Bill Murray, dies, and the other members of the newspaper come up with something to say about him at the end. Simple premise, and I'll start with what I disliked so I can get to the more positive stuff last. I should say this off the bat, I think Wes Anderson's quirky style should be complemented by stop motion in most cases. Isle of the Dogs and Fantastic Mr. Fox are some of my favorite stop motion films because of his unconventional style. While this is the first live-action Wes Anderson film I've seen, I can't say I'm that interested in watching others because something just feels off about it. Everything seemed to be about making the movie about the style. I was kind of into it at first, but as time went along it felt repetitive and it just seemed to be more and more about making sure the audience knew who was directing the movie. It's just the tiniest bit pretentious in my opinion. But the movie did have a brief animated section and I got my hopes up, but even then, it wasn't the best quality, it felt very cheap, it felt more like they were just trying to appease people who did enjoy stop-motion Wes Anderson films. Another thing, now that I know this movie wasn't nominated for any Oscars, it just feels like a movie that's trying way too hard to be an Oscar movie. It's got tons of actors in there that are somewhat or very well known, and it feels like this movie was supposed to boost their career through, coverage of a major award event. If you've watched the movie, you might understand, but it seems to be trying too hard to appeal to the Academy. Especially with the writer angle. Like seriously, what is up with the Academy's love of stories about writers if they've become so cynical about movies and screenplays that they consider animation a genre and something only for children? Sorry, I'll get to that later. A few minor things. I found that the movie just dragged on a little too long. I seriously don't remember much of anything after the hour mark. Stories could have been cut down since they just seem to keep going and going and going. Cinematography was, again, Wes Anderson, and I think it's both good and bad, leaning more towards bad the longer I think about it. The characters all felt the same, even though the actors were genuinely trying in most cases. And the 3 stories were not equally entertaining. It felt like they really wanted to make the first one into a longer movie, but it was just too short, so they stuck on 2 extra stories to fill runtime. That's all I really have to say about that. How about some good things now? The first story is very well done. It's again about an artist who paints in prison and this guy helps him become famous. It was genuinely funny and thought-provoking. Like this idea that artists place artificial value on terrible artists by claiming that their work is just beyond understanding. It had an Emperor's New Clothes vibe to it. Plus, it's actually grounded in reality. There are prisoners who painted in prisons, and their works went on to be sold for millions to collectors. Like, for example, John Wayne Gacy and his clown paintings. It's a really messed up sort of hobby that some people have, and if you want more info about it, I'll leave a video link in the description. It really is a fascinating topic if you're into true crime. The second story about college student activism wasn't bad. There was a sort of flashback sort of scene with a child soldier jumping to his death after losing faith in their cause. It was interesting, dark, and one of the scenes that was particularly enhanced by Wes Anderson's style. It was a little more memorable than the third story, is what I'm saying. The introduction to the fictional French town the newspaper writes was also the funniest part of the whole movie. The lighting, the use of camera, the actor's performance, the fact that the guy was on a bicycle like a tour guide, it was all just great. The aesthetic was just very, very well done. In general, all the actors did a pretty good job with what they were given. It was just odd to see them so rigid, I think, but that's honestly just a product of it being Wes Anderson. And then the way that each section of the newspaper was portrayed was very cute. The politics section's writer was at a podium in front of an unseen audience as she spoke. The opening tour section of the city is told by a man on a bicycle, and the art section is told by a woman in a gallery. It's all very clever, symbolic ways of delivering written word in a visual format. It's the sort of show don't tell at its finest, really, even if there's a lot of reliance on narrating over-top scenes. This movie does drag on, but it stays really witty most of the runtime. I laughed out loud a few times, and I think that was really the goal. Just a few laughs, kind of dry humor sort of thing. Overall, I'd give this a 5 out of 10, right in the middle. External factors aside, this movie is a little slow with forgettable parts, but it's a perfect representation of Wes Anderson films, warts and all. If you're willing to stay through all its flaws, it's not a bad watch. It's just not a movie for everyone. Don't Look Up is about two astronomers trying to get the word out about an approaching comet that's going to destroy the world. The two astronomers in question being played by Leonardo DiCaprio and Jennifer Lawrence. Through their ignored attempts to bluntly present facts, they come to terms with the brokenness of the society around them. Misogyny, media, politics, the like, in a classic we live in a society narrative that ends with the destruction of Earth. It's a satirical film that comments on the tendency of some, mostly Republicans, to ignore logic when it conflicts with their personal interests. For the bad stuff, first I'd like to say that the writing was just way too on the nose and thought it was way more clever than it actually was. There's this one line about the heliocentric model that made me cringe so hard, since if you weren't aware, that's like 6th grade scientist, not what an actual astronomer would comment on or say. The movie also bombarded you with this we live in a society message that I've already mentioned, that I do like in other movies, most notably The Joker. But there weren't many standout performances like Joaquin Phoenix's in The Joker to make you as invested in the story. There's very little left up to interpretation, like by the end of the first conversation with the president. Honestly, more like halfway through the conversation, you say to yourself, oh, so this is Trump and it's gonna be this whole thing where everything's done for the sake of saving face. It's all a little too predictable. I'm really not asking for much, just a little more subtlety, I think. There's also this sort of cross-cutting thing where scenes abruptly cut to social media posts and videos to show how people react to the information they're given, and the idea of the approaching comet as it becomes more known to people, and mostly how they don't believe it's coming, how it's just a political agenda, that sort of thing. But to me, in this context, that just felt like a very cluttered idea because it was used a little too often. Maybe if the cuts were shown alongside the actual main plot of the story, it would feel a little less distracting and unnecessary. But aside from that, just not a fan of how it was used here. Pacing of the story was another thing that was kind of rough. There would be these ideas that were brought up very briefly, like the tech industry guy, and then they would sort of disappear from the story for as long as the plot needed them to. This is especially egregious for the tech industry guy. But eventually everything just kind of came back at the end in this kind of clump sort of thing. It felt like very clumped. That's the best way to describe it. Very clumpy. And I personally found it a bit weird for whole characters to disappear from the story for a while, or whole ideas to just be thrown out of nowhere. I don't know, maybe it was intentional, but still, I felt like there was a lot of focus on these minor characters and their relationship to the scientists, when the story's conclusion is very dependent on you becoming invested in those scientists and their struggles, not the minor characters. The pacing too suffered as a result because of this lack of focus. And just generally, I felt like the themes of this movie have been done better. The idea of ignoring things falling apart, this climate change sort of message, has been done better. Even this idea of liberals versus Republicans with lives on the line. It's literally The Hunt, but the scrutiny and criticism for the two parties felt more equal in The Hunt. This movie in particular felt unfair to Republicans and placed all the blame of our society onto this single party, when all parties have their shortcomings and do cause their own forms of just general dissatisfaction in our society. Now for good stuff, this is mostly story stuff, but I'll try to avoid the big spoilers. I hate to say this, but I thought this movie was way more funny than The French Dispatch. It's basic comedy, which I guess is perfect for me since I'm pretty basic and dumb. It was big humor, all exaggeration, and little to no subtlety, and I just loved it because I don't really require subtlety to be entertained. This movie also just happened to hit me perfect in terms of themes and commentary, though I'm sure that's not going to be the case for everyone, especially older audiences that are already familiar with these kind of concepts. I liked how the press was represented by these two people that try to make everything seem cordial. The president was this perfect level of Trump incompetence. The social media stuff seemed accurate to me. But the gender inequality stuff, I don't think about feminism much. But this movie, though lacking in subtlety, frustrated me enough to make me care a little bit about the basic idea of feminism. On that note, I also really enjoyed seeing DiCaprio as the scientist who gets in over his head with publicity and popularity until he just cracks. As the Fauci-esque character of the story, he did a great job. As an actor, he did a great job. As a foil and similarly broken character to Lawrence, he also did a great job. Lawrence was alright too, she did what she needed to do, I guess, but I don't really think she's that great of an actress in my eyes, at least, in my opinion. She's at least utilized the best way in most cases as this girl boss that's going against the system. The same is true here. She does what she needs to do, and for once she isn't treated like this goddess for, like, trying to rebel. Instead, she's seen as crazy, like the crazy woman kind of. The other big names did a good job too. Again, Charlamagne is in this one, and he didn't do a bad job. This movie was also pretty good at establishing dynamics between characters. The president and her son were mostly funny and they bounced off of each other pretty well. Leo and Lawrence were at least a better friendship, familial pair kind of thing than Pratt and Lawrence's messed up, toxic kind of romance in Passengers. Charlamagne was utilized pretty well, and I did like how he bounced off of Lawrence as this, like, sort of, this nonchalance compared to her kind of losing it attitude, mentality. The ending was also pretty good. Everyone that just wanted to get the information out ends up meeting at DiCaprio's wife's house, and they have their last dinner together. It's really wholesome, but it's also sad because they're accepting defeat and accepting that the comet's going to kill everyone. Leo's last words, which he added to the script, by the way, are a nice way to end it compared to the "well, we tried" ending that was the original last line of the movie. I won't say any more, but yeah, the tone at the end of the movie was equal parts content, equal parts solemn, and definitely enjoyed that. Overall, I give this movie a 5.5 out of 10. While I might have had a lot of fun with it, I do recognize that it has a lot of flaws and doesn't really have much to bring to the table other than entertainment value. Tick, Tick, Boom is a theater production adopted to the screen by one of my favorite artists, Lin-Manuel Miranda. It's about the ill-fated writer of the musical Rent, Jonathan Larson, trying to finish a play he's worked on for 7 whole years, while also trying to live his life. He has friends, many of them dying or being diagnosed with AIDS during the era, a girlfriend whom he neglects by focusing on his craft, and an agent and a group of people who are working to make his musical a reality in the background. He learns to accept rejection, face the world, and start writing what he knows in 2 of his most well-known musicals, Tick, Tick, Boom and Rent. This movie is really a love letter to this writer, a writer that was gone far too soon, since he died before the debut of Rent. As for, what was bad about the movie, a lot of this stuff is really a reach, because I thought this movie was just very good overall. First of all, this movie took a while for me to get into. I really wanted to enjoy it, seriously, I did. But it took a while. Even then, I wasn't as invested as I wished I could have been. This movie also had a little bit too much narration from Andrew Garfield for my taste. I appreciated what the narration portions were trying to do, more on that later, but they did take up a large part of the movie when this is, in all honesty, supposed to focus on the movie aspect as it is a film, though I do appreciate the fusion of both mediums. More on that later as well. Point 3 is kind of a stretch, very much a stretch actually, but I think this movie should have been less Bohemian Rhapsody and more Ratatouille. Let me explain. I didn't know the guy wrote Rent until they said it at the beginning of this movie. They said it at the beginning and at the end of the film, as well as mention how and when he dies. And that's information I think they should have saved for the end, because I think I would have enjoyed it more if I thought this was a fictional writer struggling to get by, only to be revealed to be a very important writer. It would have felt a little bit more intimate, and I think it could have created a more personal connection with people trying to reach for their dreams in other ways, not necessarily in an artistic field. It's the same issue you see with other biographical films, with movies like Bohemian Rhapsody again. It's these superstars with larger-than-life stories, but it just feels hard to connect with them because they're all like, I'm going to be the next biggest this. Garfield literally says that in the movie. So let's compare that to a movie like Ratatouille. It's fictional, firstly, so the larger-than-life moments feel more believable. I don't know. But the core of the story is directed at the audience. Anyone can cook. Not everyone, but cooking, or any substitution for cooking, can come from anywhere, not just these big lives or big names we hear. It inspires and appeals to people who didn't have it all in the beginning, but maybe they have a beautiful gift that they can share. Not everyone's going to be the best or biggest thing, and I think if you want to tell a compelling, relatable story about some big-name writer or artist starting from nothing, like Tick Tick Boom tries to do, give us nothing. Don't tell us that he's going to succeed at the beginning. Don't give us a connection to the guy, just have it be a man being a human and struggling. Even if he is a gifted person, he can at least come across as more relatable and then be more of a fun surprise when it's revealed that he's someone famous at the end. That's not the greatest point that I had, but that's just how I would restructure things to appeal to an audience, not just there to marvel at the rent guy's achievements. As for the positive points of this movie, I'm going to be going more off the cusp for this one. First of all, actors. Andrew Garfield and Vanessa Hudgens were the big names of this movie, but I think everybody did a pretty good job capturing what the original stage production was probably trying to go for. I appreciated both Garfield and Hudgens especially because they were part of my childhood, and they just did a great job here. And I'm just really happy that Garfield was recognized for his performance in this movie. He really had to put a lot of effort into this project behind the scenes in terms of singing and dancing because both were things he was not familiar with. And it seems to pay off because his musical numbers were really good. Hudgens is also a sweetheart, and everyone else in this movie really gave it their all. I appreciated all the characters. I felt like I knew a little bit about each of them just through their performance and the little bit of screen time that they had, so they did a good job. As for presentation of this movie, adapting the medium of theater to film is more challenging than one would think, but I really think that Lin-Manuel delivered. Obviously, with his knowledge of film and theater, his directorial debut was more than competent. It really felt like a theater performance and a movie were both taking place, like a sort of hand-in-hand relationship, passing it back and forth when Andrew Garfield would narrate on a stage representing the theater, and then it would return to this reality of the film. It was an interesting way to do it. It felt like a theater performance and a movie were both trying to take place, which made it a little cluttered and hard to follow at places, and I'd say the most specific example of that is during the big argument of the film, but I still enjoyed it for how artistic it was. In general, the presentation of this movie felt like a creative, loving effort to bring these two mediums together. I'd say they did a pretty good job. The music was also very well implemented. Everything sounded familiar and similar, but it was just enough difference that I actually enjoyed the music. I don't know. But here's my blasphemous hot take. I didn't really like Rent much when I watched it. The songs weren't all that great to me, and I didn't like the way that the story was presented. Maybe that's why it took me a while to get into this movie, because Tick Tick Boom was originally made by him. But in this case, I think I actually liked the music numbers. Maybe Lin-Manuel changed some to slightly fit his style more. Again, I'd never seen the original Tick Tick Boom, but I liked the musical numbers in this one. I liked the one in the park. I enjoyed the duet sort of thing with Vanessa Hudgens and Andrew Garfield's girlfriend in this movie. I enjoyed the argument song, even if it did make the argument cluttered. I really liked the songs from the unfinished musical. They felt very spacey. And even if the musical was never made, I totally would have loved to see it just because the music was pretty cool. Lastly, for two more things, messages and themes, I felt like this movie was really about creativity from all angles. It was writing what you know, understanding how to deal with failure, finding inspiration, and all these other things having to do with just the production of the movie itself. It felt like a lot of creativity was embodied in this film. And these themes of actual societal issues like the HIV/AIDS epidemic during that period, I liked that there was a little bit of discussion of that because it really was an issue, and it was especially relevant to this director because Rent has a lot of those similar themes of HIV and AIDS and how people view the situation from the outside and judge these people and cast scrutiny and mistrust onto these individuals, especially people in the LGBT community. And I think that's something respectable that Rent was able to do, bring these underrepresented groups to the light in a Broadway format. I think it was partially because of Rent that made modern theater and just theater production in general this very LGBT accepting community. In my school's theater production, it's very much like that. Everybody's just very accepting, and it's not uncommon for people to ask for pronouns, and it's just nice to see all this love shared in a very fun, entertaining medium. Either way, thank you to the writer of Rent for making theater so much cooler. In general, so much cooler and quirkier. As for my last point, I want to talk about personal connection. This movie happened to hit at the perfect time for me. This idea of writing a story for 7 years and having it rejected and learning to move past it is definitely something I want to be able to do, because I have characters dating back as far as 10 years, which is more than half my life now, and I don't know, it's like, at this point, because they're my paper horcruxes, as I've said before, them being rejected is kind of like rejecting me, and I know I need to separate myself from my work a little bit more, but it's kind of me that gives them life, and writing what you know, especially, is giving people access to yourself, and then it could possibly be rejected. So, yeah, I can relate to that, and I appreciate that this movie shows what to do after when that's not necessarily something that movies show, like picking yourself up by your bootstraps and moving forward. I just really appreciate that about this film, and yeah. If you want to see some of my ideas, they're up on my channel, and yeah, if you want to see them, you don't have to. I can post more movie reviews on top of them. Writing characters is my passion, and that's part of the reason why I really liked this movie. I'd say this movie is a 7 out of 10. I know that sounds kind of low, especially for how other people have rated it, but I didn't get into it as much as I wanted to, which is very disappointing to me. However, I did enjoy this movie quite a bit for its many layers of creativity, its messages, and because I really needed a movie like this right now. So 7, maybe 7.5 out of 10 if I'm feeling generous. Well, with all that ranting out of the way, let's talk about the Oscars for a few minutes. I generally have a lot of opinions about the Oscars, but I'm just going to be sharing a few of my thoughts here that I kind of came back to as a sort of younger audience member. While I am a teenager and I am not the most cultured movie lover, I am a movie lover and I would like to share my opinions on the matter of the Oscars and generally just why I am not a fan. So first of all, let's talk about the hosts for a second. So there were 3 hosts this year, and they've done this sort of gimmick where there isn't an official host for the last few years or so. Wanda Sykes was one, there was this other female comedian, and then there was Amy Schumer. If you're going to go the whole woke girl power angle, Academy, at least choose someone other than freaking Amy Schumer. She's like the worst female comedian you could have gone with, and this isn't any big revelation or anything, but the hosts made the Oscars feel twice as long with outdated humor, cringe, and possible sexual harassment. The one comedian brought Jason Momoa, Charlamagne, and Medea on stage to pat them down, and I just felt a secondhand embarrassment and I felt embarrassed to be a human being in that moment, and I generally just felt bad for those poor actors. I personally don't think that the idea of multiple hosts is a bad one. There is a lot of downtime in between awards, and it can be filled with potential humor or entertainment from different perspectives instead of just one, but I think the execution of this year's Oscars just left a lot to be desired. Wanda Sykes was okay though. Presentation-wise, the Oscars, as usual, were way too long at a solid 3.5 hours, I think, but somehow they were more blasphemous in award presentation. Lucky me! Several awards were recorded beforehand to make the Oscars shorter, which didn't work, including the worst offender, Best Editing. That's not even the crappiest thing that happened this year, but still, editing is the core of post-production, which I'll have you know is a longer process than production itself. As somebody that makes these videos, writes the scripts, and edits everything in this video, which these videos are not complicated, but I will tell you, editing is a hard job, and for all you editors out there that were also offended by this, you deserve so much better. And that's all I'll really say about that. It was just a very disrespectful thing, and it never should have happened. As for the ones that were live, they were actually good. Ariana DeBose's speech after she won Best Supporting Actress for West Side Story was very sweet, heartfelt, and I genuinely felt happy for her. Best Supporting Actor Troy Kotsur, if I'm pronouncing that right, also gave a great speech, and one of the few that was ever given in ASL. He was funny, very down-to-earth, very earnest. He just seemed like a great person, very funny. And for both supporting actors, I really can't wait to see what they do next, because they're just genuinely good people. And I can't talk about the Oscars without mentioning how animation is treated like crap. This year, especially, animation was treated like crap. First, animation was labeled as something just for kids that parents are forced to watch over and over. Need I say that this statement was given by a Disney princess from a live-action version of a classic Disney film, a live-action version of a story meant to capitalize off of people's continued love for an animated franchise. Seriously, whoever wrote that into the Oscars, screw you. How can you say or write something like that when one of the animated movies nominated is about political unrest and fleeing the country? That's not a story for children, and we need to move on past this whole stigma with animation where it's only for kids and people who like animation are juvenile. The Oscars are cynical, old-fashioned, disrespectful, and they continue to spread stigmas like this. And the animation category just sums up all of that up and wraps it in a shitty little bow. And we've got to talk about some of the musical performances. I think Dos Oruguitas was definitely a very nice performance, not necessarily the Oscar nominee song that should have been chosen. I think Surface Pressure would have been a better choice from that movie. But generally, I thought that these songs for this year were just okay, did what they needed to do. And, of course, we don't talk about Bruno and how that was performed. So, what did I think? It was terrible, and I don't want to brag, but I did make a parody of We Don't Talk About Bruno. Check that out if you want, because it's probably better than the ego-stroking BS of the Oscars spat this year. And lastly, for the other Bruno, the slap heard around the world as it's being called. Here are my thoughts. Come up with your own opinion. There are a lot of facets to this situation, and if you're interested in a bit of drama, there's plenty to go around with this whole debacle. As for me, I'm mostly done with this whole thing. Like, it was an interesting story, and there's a lot to it, and just Will Smith and Chris Rock, this whole sort of villain character arc sort of thing, was interesting, but these are really real people, and I don't think I should get involved in this sort of thing, or share my opinions on a very personal matter. Just genuinely look up information about it, come to your own conclusions. If you still support Chris Rock, that's fine. If you still support Will Smith, that's fine. If you still support both or support none, or just don't care at all, that's up to you, and I think it should be left up to you because these are real people, not stories like the movies I just reviewed. Overall, I'd give the Oscars a 2 out of 10. It's a mostly unfulfilling experience that made me want to die. But that's all I have to say for now. If there's any other movies you'd like me to review in the near future, I will be happy to do them and include more drawings with it if you guys are still fine with that. And other than that, this is V for Verbatim, signing off until the next video. Take care, guys.